Well, one of India's oldest partners and closest friends is South Africa. And this is a very special G20 for several African nations, not least of all South Africa, with the formal inclusion of the African Union as part of the G20. Joining us now to talk a little bit about that, Vincent Magwenya. He is the spokesperson of the President of South Africa. President Ramaphosa must be delighted at this. What were his first thoughts or your first thoughts?
No, indeed, the President is delighted. As you will know, this is a position that South Africa and President Ramaphosa in particular has been advocating for quite some time, that you cannot have more than 1.4 billion people excluded from such an important premier platform for international economic cooperation. It is also thanks to India as the host, which from the onset in its presidency of the G20 championed inclusivity, championed the stronger voice for smaller countries and developing economic countries. And so thanks go largely to India. But we are certainly delighted and we see this as a very meaningful step going forward in terms of the various challenges that the world has to tackle with respect to climate change, with respect to security, that now Africa is going to be included in the deliberations of the G20 going forward.
Yeah. You know, we've had BRICS in South Africa recently and now G20 over here. Has there been this constant process of communication between India and South Africa on this very big goal of getting the African Union into the G20? It's been a bit of a process, hasn't it?
Indeed. The two leaders, Prime Minister Modi and President Ramaphosa, have had several calls in the build-up to the BRICS summit, discussing the shape and format of the summit. In light of the dynamics that we had to manage with respect to the President of Russia, but also discussing India's overall theme for the G20, what India sought to achieve with the summit, as well as the inclusion of the AU. So there has been that constant communication and full cooperation between the two countries.
Mr. Magwenya, tell us a little bit about what inclusion means, because to me inclusion is a word that comes with so many aspects. There's the entire issue of women's inclusion and empowerment, which is a core theme in South Africa as it is in our country. There's financial inclusion as well. So when we're talking about inclusion of the African Union, how would the African Union want a bigger say and a bigger stake?
Well, inclusion means a number of things to us as South Africa, but also more broadly as a continent. It includes representativity in key forums that, let's call it key global governance forums, key forums that look at developmental finance. It includes the reform of multilateral institutions, may it be the United Nations Security Council, the international development finance institutions. So it's not just representativity, but there has to be an ongoing process of reform that takes place, that takes into account the different dynamics that you find globally, particularly the challenges that are facing your smaller developing economic countries with respect to how they're impacted by climate change as well as other challenges that they face.
Let's talk about climate change. Who needs to pay for climate change tech? It's expensive, but the solutions are available, and it's been a constant financing concern.
Well, the developed world has benefited for many years, if not decades or a century, over the emissions that have impacted our environment. And therefore, it's only fair that the developed world takes a far greater responsibility to assist developing economic countries on funding the climate change goals, but also on funding their transition into decarbonization. And so our view is that whilst you may have funding that comes in the form of loans, that funding has to be upweighted more in terms of grant, coupled alongside whatever form of loans that are given. But we feel that the developed world has had more than 100 years of building its economies at the back of very strong and damaging carbon emissions, And now it's time to clean up, and that responsibility should be largely burdened by developed markets.
You know, India has got a big and strong digitalization network. For example, I have an app called DigiLocker on my phone, and it's got everything. It's got my driving license over there. It's got my car registration numbers. It's got my COVID vaccination status, the fact that I've got a second vaccination as well, all of that and a lot more. And you know, it's a digital backbone. It seems to have helped our economy a lot. There's been a big World Bank report which came out just yesterday. Do you believe this is technology which can be modified and used by South Africa?
Well, not only just technology, the entire approach that India has adopted with respect to technology, whether it's pharmaceuticals, research and development, or it's such integrated platforms of service. There's a lot that South Africa can learn and emulate from India. A large part of our cooperation or bilateral cooperation between South Africa and India centers around transfer of knowledge and skills in the digital ecosystem. And so South Africa can certainly benefit from learning from the advances that India has made in this regard.
You know, you mentioned pharma. India's had a role during the COVID period when we started the process of disseminating vaccines to countries around the world, and I believe South Africa as well. Do you believe that that is a huge link? That India, with its ability to manufacture drugs at low expenses and large quantities, plays a big role in providing this resource to several countries around the world and certainly in Africa.
One of the top two areas of Indian investments into South Africa involves the automotive industry as well as the pharmaceutical industry. If you look at issues of pandemic preparedness, for example, if you look at issues of fighting various diseases, there's a great deal of cooperation that is already in place between India and South Africa. And that cooperation can only grow.
I must also ask you one or two more questions. The first one is this. Beyond just G20, what are some of the key areas that South Africa is looking for in terms of building on the relationship with India?
Well, we are looking at consolidating the position of the Global South, consolidating the Global South as an increasingly influential bloc that has space to express itself in various multilateral forums. We are looking at obviously growing the relationship at a bilateral level. At the BRICS summit, as you know, additional members were accepted as of January next year. And we will be looking to India in providing leadership, just as it has done with this beautiful and well-organized summit, in consolidating the BRICS club of countries with the new members on board. And taking BRICS forward.
Right.
There is an expectation that additional members will be included during the Russia-hosted summit next year. And again, India will play a very critical role in harmonizing that transition of the BRICS club of countries and taking that grouping forward.
And one final question. I can't let a South African get away without a question on cricket. Do you seriously think South Africa is going to beat India in cricket in the World Cup?
Yes, of course. Why not?
Who is your favorite South African cricketer?
Our captain, Themba Bavuma.
Right. And are you a bigger rugby fan or a bigger cricket fan?
I'm actually a football fan, but right now we're defending our Rugby World Cup title in France. And so our focus is on that one. Once we've successfully defended our title in France, the Rugby World Cup, then our focus will be on securing for the first time the Cricket World Cup trophy.
Fantastic team. Some of my favorite cricketers have been South African. Dale Steyn, my favorite fast bowler, and so many others. But thank you so much. It's been wonderful speaking to you. It has been a landmark G20, certainly for the entire process of inclusion of the voices of billions around the world, the Global South and the African Union, which is such an important partner for India. Let's see how far this goes and how progress is actually quantifiable.